Hey guys, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't skip over the reservoir system, the return system, the feeder lines, and the backup reservoir to make sure that you have a complete picture of the system. Since we've gone over the buckets, the growing medium, the germination and stuff like that, I wanted to make sure that we had at least a quick overview of the reservoir system. So I'm gonna flip this around if I can. Okay, so here we have one of those big 27, I think, gallon black and yellow storage bins that I just got a few of them at Costco. So this one over here is where all my electrical is and where my air pumps are, and I'll show you that in just a second. So here we have both the feeder line, which is 1-inch landscaping tubing with the appropriate line attachments to kind of split it off. I've got some valves that I can turn off a section or turn, have it isolated, so if I needed to make a repair to something while the system was running, I wouldn't have water going everywhere. So this feeder line comes out of the pump that's submerged in the reservoir down there. Okay, so it's pumping, and you got to get a big enough pump. I think that's about a 3,000 gallon per hour pump. It's pretty big, but you can get them at like Home Depot or Amazon. But you want to have something that's going to be powerful enough to pump it uphill to the top of your highest point of exit where the feeder line's going. Now, since I've got 24 buckets and 24 exit points, I've got to make sure I've got enough pressure going uphill to feed all of those buckets. So I've got a pretty big submersible in there to handle that. So this feeder line, again, is 1-inch black landscaping hose. You can get it anywhere. At Home Depot is where I usually pick mine up. And that's your feeder into the 1/4-inch feeder lines that go into the bucket, and I showed you those on the bucket construction. And those are just connected, by a punch into the main feeder line out into the feeder hose. And something's dripping up here, so that's kind of freaking me out. Okay, I got it under control. All right, so as we talked about in the bucket construction, we have the siphon tube coming out, and that's going back into the return line. Now the return line is 2-inch PVC, okay, 2-inch PVC, and the holes that I drilled are, I believe, the same size that I drilled for the grommets, using the same drill bit into the PVC. All right, and I got enough to go the full length all the way around. There are 2 separate ends down there that are not connected, but you could connect them if you want. I just didn't when I built it. But you want to make sure you have a downhill slope all the way down back to the reservoir exit. So this tube is just a little piece of pipe that you can see goes back into the reservoir bucket. Now I cut these holes out with that 3-inch hole saw that I did for the lids up here. And that is basically a closed, recirculating reservoir system. Now, if you're in a climate where you've got lots of plants that are going to be chewing through a lot of water every day, you're going to want to have something that's going to be a backup reservoir of just straight water. Okay. Now this reservoir that I've got is just a converted, I think 35 or 40 gallon garbage can. I got one of the brutes because they're a little more sturdier than this guy. Only lasted a couple years. This guy, I anticipate lasting a few more years. But you can see it's just clear water. I've got a couple of bubblers in there to oxygenate the water and degas the chlorine. But I'll fill this up, and in the heat of the summer, it'll basically be every 2 days I'll need to refill that water, which is perfect because that's usually when I refill or refeed or add nutrients to the reservoir. So every couple of days I need to refill that. Now how that works is I've drilled in a hose, plugged in the feed line, the same 1-inch tube and that feeds into the side of the reservoir. And what I've got in here is what's called a float valve. So when the reservoir level goes down, it opens up and starts dripping more water in there. And I've got it set at, basically right now I just topped everything off. I just put in new nutrients, and it's topped off to a point where it's recirculating through and doesn't need to refill anything. And that's where you want it set. So if it's at, because when it closes down and shuts off and everything drains out of the buckets, this bucket will be full. And you don't want it to overflow, you don't want to be too low so the pump doesn't suck any nutrients out, but you want to have just enough in there that as it's circling through, it will have enough nutrient solution to go to all the buckets and return and not dry out the pump. And when it shuts off and everything drains back into the reservoir, that it's not overflowing. So that's basically the purpose of that float valve that's in there, connected to my backup, just water out of the hose with the air stones, the air pump that, you know, aerates all that water and degasses the chlorine. So that's the return and closed circuit system for the feeder and the reservoir. The last thing I want to show you real quick is just my electrical bucket. You can see I've got my air pump. My air pump right there. I got a pretty good sized air pump that's got 6 outlets, and that handles, I've got one in the reservoir, I've got 2 in my return, and I've got 1 into each of my towers. So that's a lot of air pumping through there. And then I've got a timer. This timer is for the main system over here for the pump. This other timer turns on the air pump and the other 2 pumps in the towers, the 2 towers. So, and I've got the main system set for, I don't know, during the day every 3 hours, and then I have it go off once in the middle of the night just to keep everything dry. The towers go off once every hour for 15 minutes. All right, and that is basically the hydroponic system. And as you can see, we're getting really close to the end of the season, and we're getting ready to do another harvest here. Some beautiful looking peppers. This plant is not getting the sunlight during the day. We are in the middle of November right now, so there's not a ton of sunlight hitting these plants that are closest to the house. And you can see how the towers and the soil planted plants don't have any sunlight during the day. They usually get it first thing in the morning and then late afternoon. So probably getting close to the end of the season, but you can still see they look pretty healthy and everything looks pretty good. I had a couple plants that I just pulled that weren't producing and were just kind of in the way. We'll see if those things come back. They look like they're already reestablishing, so we'll see how it goes. All right, guys. Well, I hope you got what you needed from that, and we'll see you on the other side. Have a good one.